Morning, everybody. This is your geography lesson for the next fortnight. The due date for this piece of work is the 28th of May. And this is actually going to be a task that involves you completing a presentation in a Google slide, which you will find attached to the assignment that goes with this week's lesson. Therefore, when you've completed the task, you and if you're doing it with a partner should both hand in your slideshow, and that way it can be marked. And I'm aware that both or all students have completed this. So you are allowed to work with a partner in this task, as you'll see in the instruction sheet, but you don't have to, and it doesn't affect your marks in any way whatsoever. And if you are working with a partner, could you please make sure you do so with somebody in your form class? Now, the first thing I'd like to do is have a little read of this introduction to today's lesson, and you might want to pause and just read this right now. We are looking at health today because health is strongly linked to development. And disease across the world is at its worst in countries that are poorly developed because they don't have the resources to teach their people about disease or combat diseases when they arrive and emerge. And also they don't have the resources to then manage the effects of the diseases as they spread. Okay. And therefore, we see, especially infectious diseases, spreading quite aggressively in the poorest parts of the world. Whereas in places like the United Kingdom, we have a much better ability to combat disease than elsewhere. And that's even true to a large extent of the current disease affecting the world. So what are we asking you to do this week? Well, we are first asking you to select a disease from this list. Now, I would encourage you to maybe be ambitious and go with one you've never heard of. Don't automatically or just think, Ebola, I've heard about that one. Let's do that one. I would encourage you to maybe think, I might have a look at that. These are all diseases that have significant effects on the countries in which they occur. They are all large killers of large numbers of people across the planet every year. Okay. They are also all diseases almost entirely isolated into poorer countries. These are not illnesses that you find in any way in rich countries. Although what's interesting is many of these used to be diseases that affected us in the United Kingdom, but aren't found in the UK anymore. Once you've selected your disease, you're on to step 2. You need to either decide to do this yourself or do this with a partner. If you're doing it with a partner, make sure you are working in a shared slideshow. And just remember my advice at the start of the lesson, both of you need to upload that slideshow and hand it in when you've completed it. Okay. And step 3 is the 5 key tasks. You're going to be marked on each one of these, and I'm going to talk you through each one of these to give you some advice about how you approach it. So the pattern of the disease, how the disease has changed, what causes your disease, how is it affecting the people of a country? Not what effect does it have on people, but how does it affect their lives and their ability to work and the country's development? And then finally, is there anything we can do to solve this? Okay. Now, if I just go through each of those in turn and pay attention to this section of today's lesson, because I'm going to give you some strong advice on how to approach this. So your first task is to find the pattern of your disease. So let's just take an example of one that's not on the list, but actually is one of the most, one of the highest killing diseases on the planet, and that is malaria. Now, when we look at this map, we can see a huge amount of red over Africa. And what that means is the darker the red, the higher the number of cases. And we can see that places with over 50 cases of malaria for every 1,000 people, and that's in 1 year, are concentrated in Africa. Not just Africa in general, but in the central region of Africa, in countries like Chad and Central African Republic. We can see that in regions that have between 1 and 50 cases are in the southern region of Africa, in the eastern area, and in northern parts of South America, as well as across southern Asia. Very low cases of between 0 and 1 can be found in countries like Brazil and India and China. And then areas where there are no cases are located in North Africa, as well as right across Europe, North America, Australasia, and Argentina. Now, you notice in my description of the pattern there, I was identifying regions where they were high, naming them, not just giving whole continents, but naming specific areas of continents. And I was also giving values from the key to show that I could understand what the map was showing me. So what's very clear is this is a disease that really affects Africa in a big way. So that's your first task, describing the pattern. Your second task is to describe the trend. Now you've got to find a graph that shows the pattern of change across time in your disease, the number of cases, for example, or the number of deaths. They are two different things. The number of cases doesn't equal the number of deaths. If we think about COVID-19, the number of cases is vastly higher than the actual number of deaths from COVID-19. So whatever graph you find, I want to see a pattern. Is this a disease that's increasing in numbers? Is this a disease that pops up every now and again? Or is this a disease that's actually starting to decrease? So if we look at this malarial deaths across the world, we can see that in the year 2000, in an average year, it killed over 800,000 people across the planet. But actually, most of those were in the blue area, which is Africa. We can see that 764,000. And that it steadily decreased across time. By 2005, it was killing only 738,000. So that's kind of like a 60,000 drop. If we go all the way to today, we can see that it's only now killing under 500,000 people across the globe, 438,000. But still, Africa is the dominant area where people are dying from this disease. And this is per year. What you'll notice is I described the pattern. You'll notice it's actually slower and then it's dropped much faster since 2005. That's a kind of a key date on my graph. I would have probably pointed that out if this was the graph I was describing. I talked about dates when things happened, and I also gave amounts, and I even calculated the change. So I said to drop by 60,000 between these two dates. Okay. Right. That is the second part of your presentation, describing the pattern of change. The third part is to describe and explain a range of causes. So malaria is caused by this. It's caused by the mosquito. Actually, it's caused by the Anopheles mosquito. There are lots of types of mosquitoes, just like there's lots of types of monkeys. But the Anopheles mosquito is the insect that carries the malarial virus. And it's not just all Anopheles, it's actually the female. And the female transmits it by biting human beings because she wants human blood, and that's for her eggs. And therefore it infects us. It doesn't actually, we don't get it from her. She bites an infected person, and there's a parasite in the infected person, and that parasite goes into the body of the mosquito. She'll then fly and land on another person, bite them, and then transmit that parasite into that other person's bloodstream. So that's quite a detailed explanation. You could even go further though, and say that why Africa? So why is this insect so common in Africa but not elsewhere? And there I would be looking for the fact that this mosquito needs warmer temperatures, for example. It breeds in warm, wet water. It breeds quite successfully in slum areas where there's lots of poor people living together, like the shanty town you were looking at in the video in India, in Dharavi, a couple of weeks ago. That's the kind of place that you're going to find mosquitoes breeding quite successfully. So your third task is to explain in as much detail as you can the causes. You're then going to move on to the effects. Now, I don't want to know how the disease affects a person. How ill do they become, or what symptoms do they have? I want to know how the disease affects a country and its development. Okay, so what we can see here is we can see that one child dies every minute in Africa from this disease. That's a pretty huge effect. We can see it has. We have to spend a huge amount of money. 20% of a country's wealth has to be spent on healthcare in countries that have it, because there's so much disease going around that we have to invest more in healthcare. You could maybe find some facts about how many people are ill with it and can't work, how much money a country loses because of it. So I'm looking for a range of consequences or effects of that country, and for you to describe them. And when I say a range always means give more than one. That doesn't just mean two, but it means, what can you find? And finally, how do we solve it? Now, it would be great if there was a vaccine for every disease in the world. It would be great if there was a vaccine for COVID-19, but at the moment there isn't, and nor is there actually a successful vaccine for malaria. There is some vaccines that are being looked at, and there are some vaccines that have some success, but actually tackling disease requires lots of different strategies. And when you look at malaria, for example, the most common strategy is getting people to sleep under nets so the mosquito can't bite them at night, because the mosquito feeds at night. It comes out at night. And if everyone's sleeping under a net, it can't actually feed. So that's one of the most commonly used preventative ways of tackling this disease. Another one might be to drain swamps. You might say, what's draining swamps got to do with malaria? Well, mosquitoes breed in swamps, and if they don't have warm water to lay their eggs in, then they can't breed successfully. And that would, if you drained the swamps, therefore you'd reduce the amount of malaria in an area. If you got rid of shanty towns in the developing world, you would also reduce the opportunity for mosquitoes to breed. So that's me giving you sort of 3 sort of common solutions for tackling malaria. And when you choose your own disease, you'll find that there are being various different ways that people are approaching tackling disease. Right, once you've done these 5, you need to do it all in the spreadsheet. Remember, your slide should be interesting and visual. I would like the actual thing that you would say in your presentation to be typed into your notes. So that's the little section at the bottom of a slideshow where you can type, and I'm just going to show you that very quickly. So when you open up a slideshow for the first time, and by the way, I don't want you to open up your own slideshow. Please use the one that I've left in the Google Classroom. Just being slow. Okay, yeah, it's just taking a while to load up that slideshow, which it's doing right now. When you open up the slideshow, you're going to use the main slide template here for images, remember, and you're going to want to use titles and subtitles and pictures and a little bit of text. The actual thing that you would say, the thing that I'm going to mark in terms of what your content, you're going to type down here in the speaker notes so we can see what you would actually be saying in response to that. Okay, so what you want to do is create your slides. You have to have at least 1 slide for each of these, although you can have more. You need to have headings, make it visual, make it interesting. Enjoy this piece of research, and you have until the 28th of May to complete this task.